And obviously, we just mentioned the timeline here. Why now, just 2 days before the trade deadline?
You know, people are surprised about this. People in the organization are surprised about it. And I'm guessing here about the timeline. But if you remember when the Knicks let Phil Jackson go as team president, what happened was they fired him a couple days after the draft, after he drafted Frank Ntilikina. Jim Dolan was roundly criticized for that. And now here we are 2 days before the trade deadline. Maybe that played into Dolan's thinking here with regards to the timing. Maybe he didn't want Steve Mills spearheading things ahead of the trade deadline, trying to push to make a move that he felt would jeopardize the team's future. Now, I do know that Dolan had been displeased with Mills more recently than when David Fizdale was fired. We all know he wasn't happy with Mills back then, but I do know that after these recent losses at home last week, Dolan was not happy, particularly with, fans chanting "sell the team." That always doesn't sit well with the owner. I don't know if the chants played any role in the decision here. I don't think that they did, but I do know that he wasn't happy with the on-court performance, and he held Steve Mills responsible for that above anyone else.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster season for the Knicks with a lot more downs than ups. What was the relationship like between Mills and Perry, especially in the last couple days?
You know what? Day one until, recently this past summer, I think they were in lockstep. They were pretty much on the same page. More recently, though, you had heard rumblings from people in touch with higher ups at the Garden that there might have been a little disconnect on things between Mills and Perry, and I think that's natural when you're dealing with two people who have decision-making power to a degree in an organization. But I think it had become a little bit more pronounced this season with the team struggling. I think there was disagreements on which direction the team should go, both now and this summer. And obviously, with the Knicks talking to teams like the Warriors about players like DAngelo Russell, clearly some in the organization wanted to push to make this team better in the short term. But I think some felt that, hey, let's be patient here. Let's hold on to our picks. Let's hold on to our young players until we get another crack at free agency.
Charlotte has also come up in some of these maybe trade rumors. How does this affect then how the Knicks approach this trade deadline?
In a big way, because Steve Mills was making the final call on the basketball side, and now Scott Perry is going to be making the final call on the basketball side. And I have to believe that now, at this point, the Knicks are not going to do anything to jeopardize their future cap space or their future young assets, because the idea, as far as ownership is concerned, I think, is you're trying to attract the best talent from a top basketball executive standpoint. And in order to do that, a way to attract someone like Masai or like a Sam Presti or a Trajan Langdon is to tell them, listen, we have our cap space clear here, right? We have all our first-round picks going forward. We have some good young players. There's something to build with here. That's the way you sell a Langdon or Masai or any top exec. So I think that the idea that the Knicks are going to maybe make a big trade here and hurt their cap space moving forward or trade a bunch of picks to bring in somebody in the short term, I think that idea takes a hit now with Steve Mills no longer running the show.
What about DAngelo Russell? Do you think that those talks maybe come to a halt then?
I think it depends on what Golden State is going to ask for here. I mean, they are under no pressure to do a deal before Thursday. They do want to get below the luxury tax before the end of the season so they don't have to pay that repeater tax. But that can be done with moves outside of DAngelo Russell. So they're sitting in the driver's seat. I think if they're going to ask for the sun, the moon, and the stars for DAngelo Russell, I don't think the Knicks are going to oblige there given the circumstances. I think that it would be tough for Dolan to sign off on that kind of a deal where you're bringing in a player like Russell who has 3 years left on his deal, I think around $30 million per year. So that's a big impact on your salary cap moving forward. I think that's a big ask at this point for ownership if they're going to try to attract the best and the brightest from an executive standpoint here in the offseason.
Yeah, if we know Scott Perry in charge right now, what about beyond that? You mentioned Masai Ujiri. This is the name that we keep hearing. How do the Knicks then go about replacing their president here that they just parted ways with?
Well, I think Scott Perry is going to present a case for himself. That's my guess. I don't know how effective the case will be, but I think some of it depends on what happens in the next 2 days, and some of it depends on how the Knicks play after the trade deadline. But this organization, they're always going after the big names out there, and I'm sure they will be aggressive in their pursuit of Masai Ujiri if the opportunity presents itself. And that's going to have to be in the form of compensation to Toronto because Masai is under contract. So the Raptors ownership is not going to just let him walk. So the Knicks are probably going to have to give up some money. And I think the going rate for somebody like Masai is probably at least one first round or maybe two to get him out of his contract. But it's worth noting here that Masai has told people in the past, he's told confidants in the past that he is attracted by the lure of that Knick job, and it is something that he'd be open to considering if the circumstances were right. So, things may have changed between the time he expressed that idea and now, but I certainly think that the Knicks will inquire about Masai's interest and inquire about what it would take to pry Masai Ujiri from Toronto.
Ian, the Knicks fired their head coach David Fizdale less than 2 months ago. Now you have this news with Steve Mills. It's been a decade that's been very tumultuous for the New York Knicks. Is stability the biggest key, do you think, in finding a new leader for that front office?
It is without a doubt stability. But I think number one is whoever comes in has to have full basketball autonomy, has to have the freedom to make any hire and fire that he or she pleases. That goes with front office people, scouts, coaches, and any player personnel decision. They can't have any interference from anybody in the organization, be it Jim Dolan or anybody else. They have to have the freedom to do what they want. I think it starts there. And then once you accept that and then Jim Dolan allows that new executive to have that freedom, then you allow that basketball person, whether it's Masai Ujiri or another top basketball exec, to make the decisions as he sees fit. And then you would think that he hires a general manager that he's in lockstep with. He hires a head coach that he's in lockstep with. And then they can move forward building this thing really from the ground up. But yes, the key is, A, autonomy for the top executive. And we hadn't seen that in the past with Jim Dolan. But I will say that since Phil Jackson came on, I don't think, my understanding at least, is he hasn't been hands-on in these basketball decisions. Certainly he's offered his opinion and he signed off at the end of the day on the big decisions, but he hasn't been, putting his hands into each basketball decision. So if that continues and the next guy gets full autonomy, then I think that goes a long way towards getting the Knicks to where all their fans want them to be, which is a perennial contender.